talking about? She says the same.
I'll ask them the question, and we're back.
Yeah. So I've got two things for you tonight. I have a Daf Makorot, like we've had for the last few weeks. But the truth is, this Daf Makorot itself doesn't do the topic justice. And as such, I've also got for you the article which I wrote just before Yom Ha'atzmaut last year, on which this talk is based. So I'm giving this to you because it helps. There are some nuances in the versions of the Makorot which are important. You'll see in the footnotes. So you can have this as well. You can have this, or you can share. And I'm going to be reading mostly from this, which is unusual, but because it's such a detailed and complex topic, I hope you'll forgive me for this. So tonight, we are talking about Yom Ha'atzmaut and the Shehecheyanu blessing. Basically, what is the deal with saying Shehecheyanu? I'm just turning this on, so I'm not trying to be rude. What is the deal with saying Shehecheyanu on Yom Ha'atzmaut? Now, unusually, when I told people I was researching this topic just before Yom Ha'atzmaut last year, my friend said, "Oh, no, you mean Hallel?" I said, "No, I don't. I know there's a big debate about Hallel, but what most people aren't aware of is the debate about Shehecheyanu on Yom Ha'atzmaut is actually more important, more technical, and more theologically significant."
When will you say this?
Well, depending on which derech limit you take would depend, I suppose, on when you say it. So we need to understand what would be the svara for permitting it, and once we understand that, then we can certainly give a suggestion as to when one would say the bracha. Anyway, so let's start off with the question of, did anybody ever say Shehecheyanu and Yom Ha'atzmaut? And the answer, of course, is yes. How do we know this? Because the following. On the 5th of Iyar 5708, we know, Hey Iyar 1948, the dream of 2,000 years of return to Israel comes together. Everyone's standing there in the Ulam Ha'atzmaut in Tel Aviv, and David Ben Gurion says, "We're declaring a modern state of Israel." And then what do we hear? So who was that? Rabbi Yehuda Leib Maimon, right? Rabbi Yehuda Leib Maimon, who was both a religious figure and became a political figure, cites a bracha of Shehecheyanu there, 14th of May 1948, Hey Iyar. Everyone responds, Amen, and thus the celebration of Yom Ha'atzmaut continues outside, the dancing, all that kind of stuff. And the question is, why would he say Shehecheyanu? And what would be the simple answer? Why would somebody say Shehecheyanu? Sorry. What's the rationale of saying Shehecheyanu Yom Ha'atzmaut?
And Shehecheyanu is the first time.
Right, so the first time you're returning to the modern state of Israel, you're establishing our homeland. That's a pretty cool thing to say Shehecheyanu for. There's a sense of simcha, a sense of joy. You're happy, right? Now, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Maimon, though knowledgeable of halakha, wouldn't regard himself as a posek, and he himself never wrote a tshuva as to why he did it. However, in the svarim that he did write, and I've got copies of all of these, he makes the following remark. He actually makes exactly the same remark in 2 or 3 of his svarim. This is source 1, and you have it here also in the article. He says, "B'nogel Shehecheyanu," with reference to the Shehecheyanu that I recited, he says, "Zoik yadua bracha shechol kol ish levarech b'shah she'asimcha bim'ono v'libavo zeh taloi legamay b'da'ato shel adam." He says, Shehecheyanu is a bracha that any person can say whenever they're joyful, when there's simcha in their heart. It's entirely subjective, dependent on the feeling of a person. I felt joyful, I said Shehecheyanu, everyone said Amen, end of conversation. Now what Rabbi Yehuda Leib Maimon is saying here is something important, and this refers back to a fundamental distinction in Shas about 2 broad categories of Shehecheyanu. In the Talmud, we often refer to Shehecheyanu with the word Zman. That category of Shehecheyanu refers to the Shehecheyanu recite on cyclical events, that is festivals, or when you have a new fruit which emerges every cycle. We call it Zman because that's when we say the blessing on certain Zmanim, on certain times. However, there are other sugyas in Shas which talk about Shehecheyanu and use the language Shehecheyanu, which means that time that we're joyful, we arrive to, and that's often used in moments of joy and celebration, such as buying new items, building a new house, and seeing a new friend. And we need to therefore be clear. There is a Zman Shehecheyanu, it's the same blessing. There's a cyclical, festive, or related to the seasonal cycle of fruit, Shehecheyanu, and there is a joyful Shehecheyanu. What Yudalei Maimon is saying is, I was there, Yom Ha'atzmaut, 14th of May 1948, I was thrilled, I said Shehecheyanu, and it makes no difference. Everyone should, it's really nobody's business. He's saying, I was happy, I said the bracha, that's it. Lovely. So if we want to know why would anybody say Shehecheyanu on Yom Ha'atzmaut, the answer is because they are happy. And the first time there was a Yom Ha'atzmaut, a leading religious figure there was joyful. I'm sure many other people were, but he took the platform, he took that opportunity, he grabbed that opportunity, said the bracha. Ad kan. The question then is, what happens next in the halachic conversation of Shehecheyanu for Yom Ha'atzmaut? Now, in 1949, the year afterwards, Rav Ben Zion Uziel, right, the Sephardi chief rabbi of Israel, receives a letter. A letter from a Rav at Tzfat called Rabbi Beirish Zaltz. I don't know much about him. We have a part of his letter in the responsum of Rav Uziel. And why was he writing to Rav Uziel? Because Rav Uziel was a chief rabbi, and the chief rabbi had made it very clear. Sorry?
My father was on that Smith from Rav Uziel.
Wow, Rav Uziel was a Gon Otzim.
And the first week of 11, first week of the year.
Unbelievable. Proper yachs. Yep. So Rav Uziel had ruled that on Yom Ha'atzmaut for 1949, now it's important, 1948 is a moment, is a joyful thing. In many ways anything goes. If you're happy, you say the bracha. But what do you do in the anniversary of Yom Ha'atzmaut, the first anniversary? It becomes an interesting halachic debate. So he rules the following. He says, say Shehecheyanu and say Hallel without a bracha. That was a position of Uziel for 1949. Shehecheyanu, yes. Hallel without a bracha, yes.
And when did he say Shehecheyanu?
So we're going to see the rationale will depend. Just one moment. But it's noteworthy to say nowadays we all talk about Hallel and we don't mention Shehecheyanu. The chief rabbinate said Shehecheyanu was a headline thing and Hallel was just, some psukim we said without a bracha. So Rabbi Beirish Zaltz from Tzfat writes Rabbi Uziel and says, Dear Rabbi Uziel, what on earth are you talking about? You can say Shehecheyanu. Now, it's important to note that Rabbi Zaltz wasn't saying, I think the state of Israel has no religious significance. He's making a halachic point, and he says, true, it may well have been that you say the bracha on that day. Yeah, it was a joyous day in 1948. But let's be clear. Jerusalem isn't in our hands. Israel is imperfect. And we have a precedent, because we were discussing it before. There's a machlokas as to whether you say Shehecheyanu to bris milah. Right? And many Rishonim say no, with Tosfos offering the reason that because a baby is in pain, right, then we don't say Shehecheyanu on a painful moment. So this Rabbi Beirish Zaltz of Tzfat says to Rav Uziel, how can we say Shehecheyanu? We're in pain. We've established a state, but we haven't got Jerusalem, so surely Shehecheyanu is improper. Now, I love these kind of chuvas because this is where halacha and theology come together, right?
The baby's in pain, but the father who's saying Shehecheyanu was not in pain. He should say.
Well, the point is, some Rishonim say the father doesn't say Shehecheyanu, right? So while we have the Eilu v'Eilu, the Rambam says that we do, and different communities say that we do. What Rav Zaltz is saying is, this is a bit like the shittas that Tosfos that says we don't say Shehecheyanu at bris milah because we're in pain. Rav Uziel responds and says something really very important about the modern state of Israel from 1948 to 1967. And he kind of says the comparison doesn't work. Because the baby in pain is part of the mitzvah. Whereas having Israel is one thing and not having Jerusalem is another. And we can be both joyous about one thing and yet be disappointed about another. Not having Jerusalem doesn't stop us being happy from having a Medina, a state. So, that's a big statement, right? He's saying, we're delighted we have a state. Yes, it's not ideal, but my joy about having a state is authentic and meaningful. And I should be able to say, thank you, God. And Bezos Hashem, there'll be a Jerusalem, I'll be more thankful. But one doesn't cancel out the other. And he then goes on and explains the following about the nature of the celebration of Yom Ha'atzmaut. And here I've got some excerpts from this tshuva which I've translated in source number 2. And he says, and I'll read from the English or the Hebrew, nishta here, this is translated by me. And he says, and it is correct for us to establish this bracha, he's again referring to Shehecheyanu, not Hallel, and recite it in full while using the name of God, Mishem Malchus, because all of the inhabitants of the land of Israel fled from this oppression, which was at the time encroaching upon being a danger of death for both individuals and the wider community, where the alien, he says, British government placed no value on our blood, and even pursued any one of us carrying weapon with a threat of the death penalty, such that we were unable even to protect ourselves. And so, had it not been for the declaration of the state, which unified the entire Yishuv into one unit, to gather together and stand up for our own lives, the many armies of the countries around us would have joined our enemies, at which time the waters would have carried us off, or the torrent would have been swept up into the seething waters. But in such a situation, it is certainly required and necessary to praise God by invoking the name of God, B'Shem Malchus, for redeeming us and for giving us life, for sustaining us to sustain in the same manner we recite blessing upon a public miracle. Uziel says, Rabbi Zaltz, number 1, I disagree with your svara. I don't think Bris Milah has anything to do with Yom Ha'atzmaut. Number 2, this is a mess. It's not just about establishing a day. Do you know what was happening before 1948, he says? Do you know what would have happened had we not established a state? We'd be done for. He says, we're alive, we have a country, we have our own land. It's a nace. He said bracha on a nace. It's a beautiful thing, right? Then he goes on to say, how, now, because it's a nace, what's a din of a nace? When it's a joyous moment, you say Shehecheyanu. But when you have a nace, you are allowed to say, thank you, God, for making this miracle happen to me on the same anniversary. He says, it kind of brings religious value into the anniversary, into Hey Iyar, right? Each year we can recite it. He says, through the establishment of the state of Israel, lives were saved from imminent danger. And he goes on to say the following, comparing to, while in contrast to Hallel, where there's machlokes, in where we do say a bracha, we don't say a bracha. The Birchat Shehecheyanu, he says, with the blessing of Shehecheyanu, he says, it's a chiyuv, if you feel simcha, you have a chiyuv to say Shehecheyanu. Matzana de'enkan chiddush halacha, and he says, truth be told, I'm not saying anything new here. This is a din. God's done a miracle. He's brought us life, we would have death. We're joyous, we're thankful. We say Shehecheyanu. And he concludes to say, Enkan safek bracha ela vadai mitzvah l'divrei hakol. To him, it is an open and shut case. We have the category of Shehecheyanu for simchas halev, for joy. Beyond this is more than just a regular simcha. This is a nissi simcha. This is a miraculous simcha. He says, I don't even understand why you're asking a question on this. It's a no-brainer. And it's a no-brainer you can say on the anniversary, because we're continually thankful for the miracle of us being able to have a land here, and that makes us thankful and joyous. Say the bracha. Now, in response to the question, when would you say it? The din of Birchas Shehecheyanu on simcha is whenever you feel the simcha. So he's saying it's linked to the day. In theory, I suppose one could say it any day of the year, because if you're happy, you're happy. He's saying we say it on the day because we're most reminded about the modern state of Israel on Hey Iyar, but you could say it in the morning, noon, and night. There's no particular window of time when this category of Shehecheyanu can be said. You don't need a kos of wine in front of you, right? You don't need a lulav and esrog. You just need to be happy. So if you wake up in the morning, Yom Ha'atzmaut, and you say, "Oh boy, it's Yom Ha'atzmaut," you could say it then. You could say it later on with a daglanut, right? Whatever it would be. Whenever you're feeling thankful and happy, you can say the bracha. So what we see here is the first two people who address Shehecheyanu and Yom Ha'atzmaut, Yehuda Leib Maimon, who recited the Shehecheyanu in 1948, and Rav Ben Zion Uziel, who is addressing a query a year later when discussing the anniversary of Yom Ha'atzmaut, view Shehecheyanu in the context of the Simcha Dika Shehecheyanu, and see that there's no Chiddush Halacha here whatsoever, This is Mefurish Halach and Shulchan Aruch. If you're happy, then say the blessing. Now, interestingly, and this is why one has to be extraordinarily cautious when looking through Makorot like this, though the Tshuva of Rav Uziel was written in 1949, from my understanding, from what I see, it wasn't published till much later. So I think it was a private correspondence that wasn't published till, I think, after Rav Uziel passed away. He passed away in 1953, and as I wrote down here in the notes, I believe that the Tshuva wasn't published till 1961. Could be it was published earlier in a pamphlet, but in 1949, Rav Uziel wrote that Tshuva, but I don't think many other people saw that Tshuva. And it's important to know that. So, from 1948 onwards, all we know is the Hanhaga of Rav Yehuda Leib Maimon, who did it. Everyone agrees a person who's happy on the day can say Shehecheyanu, but nobody's clear about the mechanism of saying Shehecheyanu on the anniversary, and it's not entirely clear whether the Tshuva of Rav Uziel we just learnt was more widely circulated between 49 and 61 when his Tshuvas were published. So, what then happens?
I do the halacha of the day. There's a printout halacha, Mishnah, every day. With Asik now with brachot.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge amount in the Shulchan Aruch, a huge amount of times to say Shehecheyanu. I think they never heard it before. They all say Shehecheyanu.
Right.
It was a very simple thing to do. It wasn't a misubach to say not to say. You see a mountain, you see this, you see it was something, a miracle took place.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable mountain.
Right.
So why make such a big tumult about the Shehecheyanu?
So far, there's no tumult. So far, presuming people saw the Tshuva of Rav Uziel, or we're just looking at it now, we would likely agree with him. Yeah, we'd agree with Yehuda Leib Maimon and what he did. We'd say the Svara of Rav Uziel makes sense. And though Rav Beresh Zaltz was making a halachic point, Rav Uziel basically strongly disagreed and gave reasons for it. What's interesting is, whenever you open any book about Shehecheyanu or even Hallel or Yom Ha'atzmaut, the first tshuva that really is cited is written by Rav Meshulam Rath, or Ratha. And why was that? He was asked by Rav Maimon to explain what could be a rationale for defending the recitation of Shehecheyanu in the years subsequent to 1948. So Rav Maimon says a blessing. Rav Uziel, presume his tshuva doesn't exist. People aren't sure what to do from 49 onwards. And Rav Maimon asks a posek, Rav Meshulam Rath, who was originally from Romania and then became involved in the Chief Rabbinate Council, and he says, tell me, what's the din? Right?
When does this take place?
This is taking place, the tshuva is written, I've written it here, sorry.
It's very close to the 49.
So it's dated 1952.
Yeah, okay.
He lost his place in the election. So Rav Maimon lost his seat in the elections in 51. And I suggest that maybe between 51 and 52, he had a little bit more time on his hands, and he wants to investigate this. So I guess in 49, 50, 51, some people are saying it, some people are not. There's a lot of confusion. Everyone says, Rav Maimon, you were the guy who made the decision to say it. So he says, listen, I know a bit of halacha, but I'm not a posek. So he asks a posek, he says, write a tshuva to me about saying Shehecheyanu and Yom Ha'atzmaut. And this tshuva by Rav Rath is quoted by everyone. In every sefer, when they're talking about what you can do on Yom Ha'atzmaut, they quote this tshuva. Now, it's a very, very lengthy and very technical tshuva. But what's fascinating is a huge shift takes place between his ruling and the original rationale of Rav Maimon and the rationale offered by Rav Uziel, which people may or may not have known about. So let's ask ourselves, and this I've thought out loud and I've written in the article, what happens between 49 and 52? 52 is when the tshuva is written. So, between 49 and 52, what's happening in the country? Is the country at war? Are we at war between 49 and 52? Not really. I mean, the country is a small fledgling country. You've won the war of independence, right? It's starting to find its feet, right? The country is broadly in peacetime. It's not perfect. It's not great peace, but it's not having to send out tanks and soldiers every day. And I think, people use a phrase, post-Zionism, the last 10, 20 years, there was a kind of cooling off period. 48 was a highlight, was excitement, was a climax, right? For 49 onwards, people aren't quite sure, what is Yom Ha'atzmaut? Is it just an anniversary? Or we're supposed to relive the day? Like we say on Leil HaSeder, you've got to go through the emotions as if you're going out of Egypt. What's the avodah of Yom Ha'atzmaut? That was a question, I think, that was going through the minds of residents in Israel. And I suspect that a shift happens between the personal joy of, wow, it's new, and the challenge of having a new state, which is not so easy. You realize your currency is weak, your army is small, right? You've got to build up the country. And there's lots of hope, but this is where the hard work really starts. Any person who moves to Israel from 1948 till, somewhere in the 70s, I say, you worked 20,000 times harder than I did when I moved to Israel 5 years ago, because you had to do everything, right? There was nothing there for you. Nefesh b'nefesh won't welcome you in from Ben Gurion. Was there a Ben Gurion? I don't think there was. No. You're coming on lousy planes or boats, and you're having to do everything there. So, between 49 and 52, the tone towards Yom Ha'atzmaut shifts a little bit, right? I suppose also there's a slowly recognizing what's happening in the Shah, which also impacts the tone of the country. I don't know if in education, things change in the late 40s and 50s. The more survivors start to come to terms with what happened, the more the Shah is spoken about. There's lots of complicated things happening here. So Rav Rath writes a tshuva, and he approaches it in a completely different way. It's not so much about, is there simchat halev on the day, like Rav Maimon says, or do you feel it's a miracle, like Rav Uziel says? Instead, he tries to make an argument. The Yom Ha'atzmaut is a holy day, a day of religious significance, a yontif of sorts. And that's a whole different notion, because remember I said before, there are two types of Shehecheyanu. One is a joyous Shehecheyanu. The other one, called Zman, is related to cycles, the festivals. And Rav Rath was asked what about saying Shehecheyanu on Yom Ha'atzmaut, and he looks at it through the lens of, is it a yontif, or is it something like a yontif? Now, let me just tell you the headline sugyas, and then we can explore a little bit more the texts. If you look at the handout here, sources 3 and 4, we'll see there's a machlokes in the Gemara as to whether you say Shehecheyanu on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. I said I'd mention Yom Kippur, coming a few days before Yom Kippur, right? We know that we say Shehecheyanu on the 3 pilgrim festivals, and the Shalosh Regalim. Because these are days when you've got seasons, you come about, these are agricultural festivals as well, it all comes together, it makes sense. These are days when you do things, when they're mitzvahs, hayom of sorts. The Gemara is not sure though whether you say Shehecheyanu on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Why? So Rosh Hashanah you have the mitzvah of, I suppose, shofar. Yom Kippur, what mitzvah? When we fast, I suppose, it's mitzvah hayom. But it's a different type of festival, right? It's not a seasonal festival so much. It's not an agricultural festival. So it's a lengthy sugya in Eruvin Daf Mem Amud Beis, which is source number 3.
Kippur is also known as a joyous festival.
Sorry?
The Kippur is known as well as a joyous festival.
100%. But in terms of should Shehecheyanu be said on it, the thing is, the Shehecheyanu festivals isn't to do with the joy of the festivals. The Shehecheyanu festivals to do with the cyclical nature of the festivals.
Zmanim.
Right, Zmanim. So our Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Zmanim in the sense that it's Shlosh Regalim. Kind of makes sense that they are slightly different. We know they're different in the Torah. They're described differently in terms of what we do. We'll cut to the chase, in which we basically say, yes, we say Shehecheyanu on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, even though there's no evident mitzvah sayom, as it says, V'hilchata Zman, Amar Afilu B'Shuk. You say even in the shuk, meaning even when you're not in synagogue, even when you're not doing a kiddush or anything like that. The conclusion of that Gemara is, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur have an innate holiness of the day, what we call Kedushas Hayom. And we say therefore Zman, Birkat Shehecheyanu on Kedushas Hayom, on the holiness of the day. Meaning, what happens if I live in a desert and I haven't got lulav on Sukkot? Do I still say Shehecheyanu on Sukkot? Yeah, because I'm saying Shehecheyanu on Zman, on the day, right? There's also a mitzvah that I do as well. But the day gets the Birkat Shehecheyanu. The same with Shavuos, same with Pesach, same with Rosh Hashanah, same with Yom Kippur. Whether I have a shofar or I don't, I still say Shehecheyanu. If I have shofar, I also make a Shehecheyanu on that. But Shehecheyanu goes on Itzumosh Shel Yom, on the nature of the day. Why is that important?
For example, on Sukkot, you say the Shehecheyanu Dafka when you're using the Alavim, or you say in the Sukkah. So there is a connection.
Well, put it this way: if I wasn't in a sukkah,
like you mentioned, if I didn't have a sukkah,
would I say Shehecheyanu on the Kiddush when I'm living in London when it was pouring with rain? I'd say Shehecheyanu, right? I wouldn't say on the mitzvah sukkah. I would say on mitzvah sayom. Now, what's important is all those days have significance and holiness on the day itself. What Rav Rath wanted to find out was, can I extrapolate from these 5 festivals to say that you can create new days that have holiness unto themselves? So he says, well, I'm not going to be able to do that because all of those are biblical festivals. Yom Ha'atzmaut is not a biblical festival. So he says, there are 2 festivals which aren't at least Torah Dika, which are Chanukah and Purim. So a study of Chanukah and Purim becomes a core element of the discussion about whether we can invent festivals on which Shehecheyanu is recited. Now, it may all sound circuitous, but that's what he's doing. The rabbis created festivals in which we do say Shehecheyanu. And the question is, can I do that for Yom Ha'atzmaut? That's what Rav Moshe Roth is asking. Now, within a debate, and this is going to be going back and forth, we're not going to get so heavily in the details. I discuss it in my article here, and it's late, whatever. The key debate about Chanukah and Purim is a mitzvah is the Shehecheyanu on the mitzvahs, or is the Shehecheyanu on the days? Do I say Shehecheyanu on the day of Chanukah, or on the mitzvah of Chanukah? Do I say Shehecheyanu on the day of Purim, or the mitzvah of Purim? L'may nafkamina, why do I care? I care a lot. If I say it on the day, then we have at least a blueprint, we have a precedent of creating rabbinic festive days on which Shehecheyanu is recited, even when there is no mitzvah apparent. If I say Shehecheyanu only on the mitzvah of the day, well, there's no mitzvah of Yom Ha'atzmaut. I mean, we can claim that we have a barbecue, you have falafel, you put on a flag, but that's not a mitzvah. It's not a deraisa, it's not a rabbanon, it's not on anything. So this nuanced discussion about whether Shehecheyanu, Chanukah, and Purim is on the day or on the mitzvah becomes key to many of the tshuvas related to this topic.
But we just mentioned that on Sukkot, that you didn't have the Sukkot, and if you didn't have the day, then it has to do with the day.
Right. So it works for the biblical festivals. Basically, everyone concedes that the biblical festivals have holiness unto the day. They have Kedushas V'Yom. There's a debate, a question mark, over whether Chanukah and Purim have Kedushas Hayom. So imagine I'm in a place where there's no Megillah. Do I say Shehecheyanu on the day of Purim? Imagine a place where there's no menorah. Do I say Shehecheyanu when there's no menorah? Now, the point is, most Rishonim and Acharonim say Chanukah and Purim, we say Shehecheyanu on the mitzvahs hayom, right? On the mitzvahs of the day. They don't have innate holiness per se. They're festive days. I mean, they have joyous holiness. They're days of importance. But we say Shehecheyanu on the mitzvah. However, there were a handful of sources which say different. And reading those sources becomes the maker or breaker of the argument created by Rav Rath and then developed by others as well. So I'm going to skip just for a second and tell you, they basically rely on a Meiri and they rely on a Pri Chadash. So they rely on Meiri, not on the Pri Chadash. The Meiri that Shehecheyanu can be recited even in a place when you haven't got a menorah. That Shehecheyanu can be recited even on the day. They also rely on Rav Yaakov Emden. You'll recall Rav Yaakov Emden I mentioned in the second shir about weddings. Rav Yaakov Emden had a very clear conception of Shehecheyanu, in which he saw Simchas Hayom and Simchas Halev as being really the primary factor of all aspects of Shehecheyanu. Hopefully at some point I'll write a lengthy essay about Rabbi Yaakov Emder's Shitta on Shehecheyanu. Anyway, so what comes about is the following. Here I'm going to quote to you from source number 5. After this very, 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 very long tshuva, very detailed, not poetic, not with the flowery language of Uziel, who speaks, with such passion about the state, but this is a detailed discussion about whether Chanukah and Purim do or don't based on the Meiri and Rav Yaakov Emden and this, that, and the other, and trying to challenge the Pri Chadash, who says different, etc. He says, Timna ladina b'nidain ditan. What comes out in terms of the law of this matter, that on the day when a miracle occurs to the entire people of Israel, where they went from death to life, from subjugation to freedom, and as such a festive day was established, that is Yom Ha'atzmaut. He says, I believe that Yom Ha'atzmaut has been established as a yontif, right? According to Pri Chadash, should not recite Shehecheyanu. He says there were what some people would say, that a day disconnected to mitzvahs doesn't get Shehecheyanu. He says, but according to the Meiri, and according to Rav Yaakov Emden, and according to Ri Molchoi, and according to the Mishnah Brura, he says, yes, you can say Shehecheyanu. And then he says, if you say Shehecheyanu prior to saying a Hallel, then you can say that the Shehecheyanu is also on the mitzvah of Hallel that you want to be saying as well. It's convoluted, and say, feel free to read it in greater detail in the article. Basically, what Meshulam Rath does is he establishes an argument to make Yom Ha'atzmaut into a festive day, and relies on detailed halachic rulings to claim that we can learn that from Chanukah and Purim. And then he goes on to say, and here I'm just reading in English, what comes out from all this in terms of the law is that while it is not possible to require every person to recite the Shehecheyanu on Yom Ha'atzmaut, he says, while I can't make everybody see the day as a yontif, right? Nonetheless, whoever wishes to say the bracha may do so, and there's no concern of bracha v'atola, blessing in vain. And then he says, and if you're feeling happy, all the better, because then you're doubling up the meaning and the power and the messaging of Shehecheyanu. And that's it. That's really the key thing here. Now, what you have is two very interesting models. You've got the tshuva of Uziel, which is no chiddush halacha, right? He's basically saying Yom Ha'atzmaut is a day in which we are happy. We say Shehecheyanu when we are feeling happy. Say Shehecheyanu halacha p'suk b'shulchan aruch. Then you've got the tshuva of Meshulam Rath, who very much is making a chiddush halacha. He's making an innovative halachic ruling, deducing that Yom Ha'atzmaut is a watered down version of Chanukah and Purim, and relying on the Meiri and a few other sources to say that a day can have innate holiness, even disconnected from mitzvahs, and consequently Yom Ha'atzmaut can get a Shehecheyanu bracha. So far, so good? You confused yet? Beautiful. Now, so that tshuva has been written in 1952, and that tshuva circulated everywhere. Now, it's important to think about what's happening in terms of halachic discourse. Remember, Yudalei Maimon, he was happy, says a bracha. But that was in the heat of the moment. The tshuva of Uziel, I don't think many people saw. I may be wrong. I'd be very happy to be proven wrong, but I don't think many people saw. And so a development occurs in the early 50s of looking at Yom Ha'atzmaut as a festive day. And Meshulam Rath really makes a very, he thinks he's made a compelling argument to say Yom Ha'atzmaut is a yontif. Now, there's a Rav.
And he says you should say it before Hallel.
He says you say it before Hallel, but so that you can say it's also on a mitzvah. I mean, he's trying to. It's a bit of a messy psak, right? You know, you either have elegant psakim or you have messy psakim. This is a messy one. I mean, it's fascinating to read, but he's trying to grab as much material as possible to make an argument. He's grabbing from Chanukah and Purim. He's grabbing from Hallel, right? He's grabbing from this, that, and the other. Does it work or not? Many people say it is. Many people quote this tshuva. I think the quantity of people who quote it versus the quantity of people who actually learnt it is, many to small. And I believe that if you want to learn halachic material like this, it takes. I remember when I sat down and learnt this tshuva seriously. You sit down a few hours, a couple of cups of coffee. You have to really read it with care. Now, around about the same time, a Hungarian Rav who became later the Av Basin in Tel Aviv, called Rabbi Shua Menachem Ehrenberg, starts thinking about this topic of Shehecheyanu Yom Ha'atzmaut. He actually publishes his tshuva in a series of articles in the journal called Kol Torah, from 5710 to 5712, meaning 1950 to 52. So, in the blurry days of 1949 to 52, when people aren't quite sure what to do, right, and when Rabbi Yehuda Maimon hasn't yet asked Rabbi Meshulem Rath to write a tshuva, this Rav starts writing a tshuva, and he somehow published it piecemeal. I don't quite know why. It's later published in his volume of tshuvas. I mean, he didn't have his own volume of tshuvas. So where are you going to publish a very, very, very long tshuva? I guess every edition of Kol Torah, everyone saw this next thing. I mean, I looked at the tshuvas. You get literally paragraphs versus paragraphs. Now, what does he do? He was asked by somebody else what he thinks about vis-a-vis Shehecheyanu on Yom Ha'atzmaut. And he says the following, and this is his opening line, his opening gambit. He says, Af ki ani ba'ani ba'arti. He says, even though I myself have explained, mitzvah lasos yom tov va'af lo mahalel. He says that it's a mitzvah to make a simcha on a festive day, right, and even to recite Hallel. He says, mehechi titi lo markein, right? Who said you can say that Shehecheyanu? An interesting shift happens. For Uziel, Shehecheyanu is a no-brainer. Hallel, we're not quite sure, right? When Meshulem Rath, he says both. And Rav Ehrenberg says, Hallel I get. Say Hallel, great. Shehecheyanu, are you kidding me? Where did anybody get to say permission to say Shehecheyanu? He says, who says Yom Ha'atzmaut is greater than Chanukah and Purim? He says, because if we didn't have the mitzvahs of Chanukah and Purim, we wouldn't be saying. He challenges the rationale of Meshulem Rath. He quotes the Mishnah Brura and the Meiri, which Meshulem Rath is relying on. He says, Ulai mikan ba lidei sofek shema gam b'chag ha'atzmaut yesh davar. He says, perhaps from here they came on the possible conclusion that bracha should be recited. Now, he's bringing merames to the svara of Meshulem Rath, which hasn't yet been published. Maybe he's been thinking out loud about it, but in his installments from 1950-52, he's already challenging a tshuva which may not yet be fully published. He said, anybody who thinks he can say Shehecheyanu on Yom Ha'atzmaut because Yom Ha'atzmaut of Yom Tov is just wrong. It doesn't make sense. And he goes on to say, you can't compare it to Chanukah, and now listen to why. It's not just on a technical reason. It goes back to the same kind of argumentation of that Rav from Zaltz from Tzfat. He says, with Chanukah, they established the day of Chanukah on those very days that a miracle occurred. On Chanukah, Chav Hey, right? We got into Beis HaMikdash, right? So we celebrate Chanukah. He says, what's the significance of Hey Iyar? What's the significance of the 5th of Iyar? He says, this is his language, fantastic. He says, who's gone up to heaven and come back to say that on the 5th of Iyar a miracle happened? Now, I guess he may well have at least seen the tshuva of Uziel by this point, or because Lashon Nes, right? So he says, who's gone to? This is Lashon in Hebrew. He says, Man Solik Li'ila V'ati Amar B'Shabiyam He'ir Naseh Nes. He says, who's gone up to heaven? In fact, it's much more logical to argue. He says, if you want to make an argument for a festive day, I'll tell you which day. The 17th of Kislev, meaning the 29th of November, 1947. You want to make a day? That was a day. Chavtet November is when the world says, go for it. Hey Iyar is just the day the Brits left and Ben Gurion stood up. That's the only miracle that occurred, he says. That's the day when God placed in the heart of the nations to release the land of Israel for us. More likely, the major miracle occurred on the day that we strengthened and overcame our enemies at the end of Milchemet Ha'atzmaut. Alternatively, it may have been another day that we didn't even realize, since a person is unable to recognize the miracles that occurred to them. He said, but on the 5th of Iyar, there was no miracle. Instead, it was that specific day that the decision was made for the British to end. So we chose that day. He says, how can you say Shehecheyanu Kimanu B'Yanu? Like that day has any religious significance.
It was a declaration.
Right, but what he's arguing is the following. If you take the rationale of Shehecheyanu that you're joyous, fine. Everyone agrees. Meaning, The point is, if you take the first approach of Shehecheyanu, Rav Maimon and Rav Uziel, nobody questions that. But if you start investing significance in the day, you have to really say the day is significant. He says the day is almost arbitrary. Yeah, things happen on that day, but it's not like God invested in Hey Iyar any greater thing than any other. You want to look back, Chav Tet November is a more important day. And he then says, you can't say Shehecheyanu v'Gimanu v'Giana Azmanas. It was a day when the decision nations came into fruition, because that's when they weren't subjugating us, right? This is absurd. It's the nature of Shehecheyanu. It's celebrating new experience. At best, you can say on that day we weren't as persecuted as the day previously. That's not a bracha of Shehecheyanu. Shehecheyanu is about something positive, not the reduction of something negative. So here we have these fascinating theological and halachic debates. Rav Maimon, who's joyous. Rav Uziel is joyous about miracles. Rav Rath tries to hold different tack and tries to make the day into a yontif. Rav Ehrenberg, roughly the same time, 50 to 52, he says it's not a yontif and it wasn't even a miracle. Say Hallel, but Shehecheyanu has no kesher. Ma kesher. Now, here gets the exciting bit. I've taken too long so far, but this is where serious research pays off. Rav Goren's tshuva. You see, how many people do you know that says Shehecheyanu and Yom Ha'atzmaut?
I don't think you ever use it.
You think they say it?
I don't know. In my shoe they don't say it.
Like most things, I mean, I know in the Koran Machsa, I have it here. In the Koran Machsa, they'll talk about it as something that some people say Yesh Mavachim Bircha Shehecheyanu, but to Yesh, right? And you'll struggle to find any siddur other than this one that even talks about it. Let me tell you why that's the case, from what I understand. You see, until this point, you have a debate about how to look at Yom Ha'atzmaut. Is it a day on which we were happy and we should stay happy, or is it a festive day, Yontif? And they're machlokes in each way. Rav Goren says two things which are very interesting. He says it's a Yontif. And then he says something even beyond what Rav Shulam Rat says. It's a Yontif and everybody better celebrate it. You're chayav to say Shehecheyanu. Now, I want to make it clear. If you look at the edition of the Tshuva of Goren now, it doesn't say that. I had to go in the original newspaper in Hatzofer from 1956, when you see what he actually said, right? Birkat Shehecheyanu b'Chag Ha'atzmaut. And he originally wrote something, and there was a huge kickback. And later he changed a couple of words, and those changes are so pertinent.
He did.
He himself did. I know, because in the later editions of his own volumes. In his original tshuva, he says, it's a yontif, better listen to me. And he says, and you have to chayavim. Now, I've made that in bold. This is source 7, right? Again, this is an abridged version of my translation. I'm happy to give you all the text. I've given you all the references in my article. Basically, he says, the Meiri tells me that Purim and Chanukah have innate holiness. Yom Ha'atzmaut can have a day of innate holiness. And he goes on to say, every festival that's been established by the community is an expression of praise for the miracles of the Creator, of His wonders, who has redeemed us and redeemed our land and our birthplace from our many enemies, and having established a duty to establish festival days for miracles, I believe that we should establish on an annual basis, and we require, according to halacha chayavim, that we recite Shehecheyanu just like Chanukah and Purim for a festive day. He doesn't say it's a watered down version of Chanukah and Purim. He says this is a third rabbinic festival. There's Chanukah, there's Purim, there's Yom Ha'atzmaut. And he concludes by saying, Makorot halacha mechayavim amirat birkat Shehecheyanu v'shem u'malchus b'Yom Ha'atzmaut chol mi shemargish b'nafsho b'yom zeh simchas amitit. He then says, but whoever feel it, you have to do it. But he does it through the framework of a yontif rather than through the framework of simchat halev.
He's never very strong on I davened by him once in Tel Aviv on Shabbat. Before learning, anybody who wanted to have a Mishaberach for a cholet, or anybody wanted to say Birkat HaGomer, had to go before him, before they started praying. he would ask, and he would say yes or no. If he went to Matos, if you flew to America, he said no. So he wasn't very, very strong on that, but here he is very.
Well, truth be told, there are poskim who say you don't sit on flying. Or Chaim David Halevi himself, and I quote him often, he says that flying no longer needed. Notwithstanding that, the key thing is the following. And I've written a number of shiurim about the psakim of Rav Goren. Rav Goren had a knack of pushing the boundary just a little bit more than was both either normative or necessarily comprehensible to almost any other pasuk in the world. Meaning, if he'd have just said, you can, fine. Use a wash and chayiv. And that made even those most strongly Zionistic, supportive things saying, what the heck are you on about? You can't just make up a rabbinic festival and tell everybody you're chayiv to say Shehecheyanu. What are you? Rav, he made an argument to say you can. It's a bit like Rav Goren was much more forceful, that kind of fighter thing. The same thing with the Langer case, and the same thing with that. Goodness, a whole bunch of rulings where he used force rather than necessarily subtle diplomacy, and it led to significant consequences here in the modern state of Israel. We know the whole shift that happened in Israel after the Langer case.
I have a picture of Rabbi Goren, only in 1967. He's standing on the Evan Hashtiya,
right,
with the Torah and the Shofar.
Right.
On Evan Hashtiya.
So he was a fighter, right? But in terms of halacha, brilliant though he was, and I've studied a lot of his writings, there are a few rulings which really stand out. And this one most people don't realize, especially since the more recent editions say a different language. It says ma'af shirim rather than chayavim, right? Rashoim rather than chayavim. Again, I note it here, and I can show you. So, and it was nobody else brings this down. That's this difference. I was there, and I'll tell you how I know this, because a few weeks later, Rav Moshe Tzvi Neria writes back in Hatzofer and rips apart Rav Goren. Now, Moshe Tzvi Neria was a religious Zionist Rav, right? But boy, if you want to see sharp language, look here. Because he's responding to the original ruling. And when I read Rav Moshe Tzvi Neria, I said, what does he say? Rav Goren, I'd read the tshuva in a more recent edition, he didn't say that. Then I looked at the newspaper and I did a double take and said, oh boy, he did originally. And he basically says the following. Number one, if you look at the Meiri carefully, he says the idea that Chanukah and Purim have innate holiness, but then he changes his mind at the end. He says, Rav Goren, read it carefully. And then he says, what are you talking about? This is his Loshen. Ketzad efshar lavov likvosh birkat Shehecheyanu b'Chanukah and Purim hi al hayom tov etzma. How can you say this? We've come to establish a Shehecheyanu on Chanukah and Purim that's on the festive day itself, an opinion which only the Meiri seems to support, and you've misread the Meiri anyway. Meaning, you're relying on one source and you've misread it any which way. And then you're making this big Torah to say, Chayavim to say on Yom Ha'atzmaut. He says, how can you then render a halachic ruling on the basis of this opinion that conflicts with the opinion of the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, right? Which goes against the whole thing that we can, because they make it very clear that Chanukah and Purim are related to the mitzvahs, not just a day. This says, Loshen la'Rav Shlomo Goren Pitronim, right? Only Rav Shlomo Goren has the answers. He wasn't saying that nicely, right? Only you seem to know everything that we don't know. Well, I asked somebody in my community when I wrote this article, he happened to study Rav Neria. I said, I'm sure if that was his attitude to Rav Goren on this, they must have really disagreed about a bunch. Meaning, when you read his article, you can see there is a lot of frustration which goes beyond even this ruling. And I think they certainly didn't see eye to eye on a bunch of issues.
Meiri, by the way, was one of the strong advocates of going up that
Right,
way.
but as I mentioned here, and the Meiri's rulings weren't known till like the 1800s, right? So a lot of times we presume that people may well have agreed with him if they'd known his writings, but if they didn't know his writings, the Meiri is an important authority, but he's not as authoritative as he would be because you haven't got the other Rishonim Achronim echoing his rulings. Either way, Rav Neria basically says, Shehecheyanu on Simcha, fine. If you want to make an argument, Shehecheyanu Zman, I hear that. I disagree, but I hear that. But that would be something that maybe you could do. To make an argument, there's a chiyuv to say Shehecheyanu on a festive day of Yom Ha'atzmaut is unheard of. And to say you have the basis of this is a me'iri, which you misread, Goran, you're out of the halachic picture. Now, I believe, quite seriously, that from this ruling, which occurs in 1956, things change. Until this point, Rav Uziel had looked at Shehecheyanu as being their higher consideration, Hallel as being a smaller thing. We saw Rav Ehrenberg saw it the other way around, but I don't think so many people were familiar with the rulings of Rav Ehrenberg. From 1956, I think that the misjudged ruling of Rav Goren made Shehecheyanu a thing that we don't say because it became so controversial. If you're saying it, you're making a theological statement that the day is a festive day. So ironically, the blessing which is most suited to Yom Ha'atzmaut, more than Hallel, I think from 56 onwards, we see a slippery slope. And from then on, pretty much all the other tshuvas are negative, and they start talking about brocha levatala, which, by the way, itself shouldn't have really been a big matter. They start chanting the more meaning. Until this point, there's been a healthy conversation about Shehecheyanu, whether it's for the joy, whether it's for the festive day. From this point on, things become very unhealthy, and focusing on very, very minor matters, because I think Shehecheyanu now got taken off the table. And from then on, till today, very, very few shuls even contemplate it as a thing to do, despite the tshuva of Uziel, who everybody would agree was a Gaon Otzim. No matter went to shul and said, I'm saying Shehecheyanu, Rav Uziel, nobody would say, who's Rav Uziel? But they would say we don't do it. And why? I think it's from here. Now, I should make it clear that since then there are a few other rulings. We've got Ovadia Hadaya, who basically goes on and says, on Hey Iyar, no miracle occurs. It was on that very day when the declaration was made known to the Arab nations, they all gathered against the Jewish nation and started war against us. He says, if you really want to make a day, it should be on the 29th of November, but Shehecheyanu nishta. Rav Hadaya basically echoes sentiments of Rav Ehrenberg, pretty much word for word. Rav Kook's brother, Rav Shaul Chana Kook, he comes up with a clever device. I didn't conclude this in the Dapei Makarot, but because the tshuva is much more subtle than I could reflect there. But he comes up with a subtle device of trying to say the bracha and getting away with it. He brings a shitta that says, if you say a bracha levatala, some people say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Olam Va'ed. Now we generally say that's only if you do it by accident. He says, no, actually there is a ruling on which you can rely, that if you say a bracha levatala and you say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Olam Va'ed, you've done no wrong. So he says, say Shehecheyanu and say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Olam Va'ed. So for those who are not offended, no offense has been done. For those who are offended, we've taken it away. It didn't stick. But again, you're hearing people trying to figure out a way. Rav Kook's brother saying, I want to say Shehecheyanu. So you've got a halachic problem with it, here's a solution. But you can hear there's a battle taking place, an ideological battle, about the nature of the state of Israel. Is it a day on which we're happy? Is it a festive day? Right? Is it about Hallel? Is it really about Shehecheyanu? Rav Goren's ruling made Shehecheyanu have a taint of negativity. I strongly believe that, because Rav Neria was so forceful against him, and I'm sure there are many others as well that criticized him. But here, Rav Chana Kook is trying to keep it in the halachic conversation. Then comes Rav Ovadia Yosef. Rav Ovadia Yosef starts talking about both the Makorot, the Meiri. He challenged Rav Rath. Again, he kind of does what Rav Neria does to the ruling of Rav Goren to the ruling of Rav Rath. He says that, you quote the Meiri and this, that, and the other, but basically there's almost no halachic leg to stand on, and thanks for the contribution, but you came second place in the halachic conversation prize. He says you don't say Shehecheyanu, it's just not appropriate. And then he's one of the first who starts talking about bracha levatala, because although I mentioned that many people say there's no such thing as bracha levatala for Shehecheyanu, Rav Ovadia believes that that's the case. Well, there are Rishonim who say that's the case, and he echoes that. He says, in saying it would be a bracha levatala as well. I previously quoted Rav Chaim David HaLevi. He has a tshuva written in 69 in his volume called Data Medina. And he says regarding the recitation of Shehecheyanu, which is simpler to address than Hallel, he too is like Rav Uziel, because he was a Talmud of Rav Uziel. He says Hallel, that's a complicated thing. Shehecheyanu, that's a simpler thing. He says it doesn't require deep analysis, based on what we previously explained, that in instances there is a doubt where a person is duty bound to say Shehecheyanu bracha or not. In the case of bracha levatol, it's totally fine. And if you're happy, you're happy. And he goes on to say, it's therefore clear, or if you want, I can redo the hymn. He says not just on Yom Ha'atzmaut, but also on Yom Yerushalayim. He's one of the few who mentions it explicitly. Whoever says Shehecheyanu Yom Yerushalayim and Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim, they're expressing a feeling of their true joy, and certainly there's no concern. So Rav Chaim David HaLevi goes back to the approach of Rav Uziel. It's all about Simcha Salev. It's not about Yontif. Forget the Yontif discussion that Rav Rath brings, that Rav Goren brings. Right, and there was challenge about the holiness of the day by Rav Ehrenberg and Rav Ovadia Hadaya. It's about if you're happy, say it. If you're not happy, don't say it. One final tshuva of note about this whole process is Rav David Shlush, who was a former chief rabbi of Netanya. He passed away last year. He said he goes through. It's a very, very, very long tshuva as well. He goes to the whole sugyas of Erevin, about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, that kind of stuff. He mentions the fact about the 29th of November. He quotes all the other sources, most, not all, but most of the other sources. What's his suggestion? And this is what we find in every discussion about Shehecheyanu, when people just don't quite know where to move. He says, what's my advice? Lachin beged chadash, have a new piece of clothing, or pri chadash, or have a new piece of fruit. Remember, talking about the state of Israel here. He says a new piece of clothing or a new fruit. Say Shehecheyanu on the fruit or the clothes, and say on the day. I've made it very clear that I find that kind of device, I'd say is wrong. I mean, I'm a nobody, but it's very difficult to comprehend how you can hook national or personal significant joy on a piece of fruit. Moreover, again, he's also making a statement. If Shehecheyanu for Yom Ha'atzmaut is about personal joy, I don't need any of these things. I can say it. This is only a way to get around to say it's really a yontif, but I don't want to say it's a yontif. So kind of yontif. So like we said on second night Rosh Hashanah, so I'm going to have this kind of thing. Basically, what do we learn from all of this? Firstly, we learn that there's a big conversation about Shehecheyanu Yom Ha'atzmaut, which almost nobody knows much about. Much more importantly is, there's a rich conversation about the nature of Yom Ha'atzmaut. And this is not known. And here's there. Is it a day in which we personally feel joyous, and we personally express our joy? And if that's the case, like with Maimon, like with Uziel, like with Chaim David HaLevi, you want to say Shehecheyanu, fine. You don't. Nobody's stopping you. The permission is there for you. It's Birkat Reshut, and if you feel that becomes a personal chiyuv to say it. So that's one way of looking at Yom Ha'atzmaut. It's a national day which is religiously expressed through personal blessings of Shehecheyanu. Or is Shehecheyanu Yontif? That's the argument made by Meshulam Rath to some level. It was an argument that was pushed by Rav Goren to a further level. The problem with that is it has almost no legs to stand on, as made clear by Rav Neria, as made clear by Rav Vad Yosef, as made clear by the ruling of Ehrenberg. If you're talking about the significance of the day, we talk about 29th of November more than the 5th of Iyar, and Ovadia Hadaya. And so that becomes a little bit more musubach, a little bit more complicated, and I personally think that it shouldn't have gone down that route. I personally think that the whole conversation of it being a yontif was utterly redundant. It never needed to be done. What's my conclusion? I have three conclusions. One to do with this, and the other to do with more wider issues. Number one, Shehecheyanu is really not that complicated a sugya, and we've made it so confusing that people don't know how to turn. We were interested in saying the blessing, but people weren't able to tell the difference between the sug of Zman and the sug of Shehecheyanu, and overshot in one place or another. And we need to know the difference. There is Shehecheyanu on times and seasons, the Shehecheyanu on joy and celebration. The joy and celebration one doesn't need anybody else's permission. You don't need to ask anybody's thoughts. Is it okay or not? You say it. It's your bracha. In terms of festivals, then there is a system. The system, like we have in Megillat Tanit, what days we say this, that, the other. And here we're trying to make an argument for a new system, which wasn't necessarily that successful. So, rule number one, a Jew should know about the mechanisms of Shehecheyanu and the different rules. And if you feel clear about them, they will be autonomous about the former and cautious about the latter, because that's how we should be. That's point number one. Point number two, this is a final session of a 4-part session about Shehecheyanu. What I've tried to do over these sessions is show this is a fabulous framing device for far, far wider conversations. The first session was about how our desire to measure feelings and aspects of Jewish living in Judaism is actually diluted and reduced and marginalized the recitation of Shehecheyanu Orthodox community, which I think is incomprehensible. The second, we spoke about weddings, and I demonstrated how a misunderstanding about Shehecheyanu and a misunderstanding of how it was recited has led to objectification of women, that they now become objects for Shehecheyanu rather than participants of its recitation. The third session was about... A chassan says it in certain things the chassan says it on the talis, but the question is, does a kala say it? And it's generally not the minhag to do so. I've made a suggestion that maybe she could on her ring if she wants to. I'm certainly not pushing that if she wants to. But we've seen, at least in a number of Makoratis, some people say that the chassan says Shehecheyanu when he says his talis on the wife. She becomes a piece of property that he purchases, which, although we have Lashon and Mishnah, even Lashon and Mishnah doesn't talk about kinyan in the fullest sense of the word. The third sentence was about how we deal with equality, because modern Jews like to think that Judaism presents a gender equal view of the world. And the answer is it doesn't entirely. So there was jousting and debating as to a seeming dissonance between the bracha you say on the birth of a boy and the bracha you say for the birth of a girl. And seeing how people joust and figure out solutions is valuable. It's important because it gives us a prism as to how do we deal with gaps between the world as we see it in books and the world as we see it in the world. And answers like Rabinovich is, it's not so difficult, right? The Rambam didn't pass in that way. The Shulchan Aruch didn't ever say anything negative about women. If you read text carefully, it's not as bad as you think. It's not bad at all necessarily. What we see from here is how we look at Shehecheyanu in terms of festive days and celebrations. And Israel is a hot topic, and it's a shame that we don't talk about Shehecheyanu anymore. I think it's a far more important conversation around Shehecheyanu than whether you do or you don't say bracha and hallel. That's really a technical question, far more technical than this. The truths about bracha, yes or no, on hallel are nowhere near as theologically significant, right, and practical than the ones we've seen here about Shehecheyanu. So that's my second point. The third point is, this is an interesting series. Hopefully I've provided you with food for thought. This article I hope to publish at some point, a couple of others I have. Be'ezus Hashem, at some point in the next couple of years, I'll write a book on Shehecheyanu, because I think there's a lot to be said about it. What I wanted for this course, for this series, is for me to basically speak out loud and see if you guys thought I was making any sense. So maybe you'll say yes, no, maybe. But with that, I think we're going to end.
Excellent.
But we should mark us soon.
Do you know of any shul today that says Shehecheyanu?
Well, as I say, the Quran, they say this, so I guess there are some shuls who do. I don't think many do, but the issue is they don't for stupid reasons. If a person says we don't for a shitta, fine. But they don't because they didn't even know that they could, and if they think they shouldn't, it's because they, sadly most people aren't thinking in nuanced halachic terms. Yeah. That we do. Have some more cups. It's all good. Take. If you want, you can have the copy of the article. You have one. You took one.
Thank you. Yeah.
You gave those,
Lovely. Vakasha. It's all good. It's all there. Have another one. Yeah.
Really, your research is astounding.